Hello, my name is Chris Kneeland, and I'm the CEO of Cult Collective, an audience engagement firm that helps brand leaders reap the benefits of customer advocacy. It's been difficult for our clients to process the magnitude of what has transpired to both commerce and capitalism since early March. I haven't met a business owner yet who had a contingency plan in place for what we're currently experiencing. So I want to spend a few minutes today sharing some recommendations based on things that I've seen and heard and read to hopefully help business owners begin the recovery process. Not really since World War II has entrepreneurism and free enterprise been so severely impeded. Just like then, the full implications, both the good and the bad, of these crazy times won't be fully understood for years. And I'm not here suggesting that I have all the answers. In fact, way too many people are claiming to be pandemic response experts. Even big reputable brands like Forbes and Entrepreneur.com and the Harvard Business Review are publishing lots of content that portrays a level of competence on this subject matter that we should not believe. There is simply no way that there should be over 500 million search results for how do I keep my business going during a pandemic. We need to accept the fact that we are in uncharted waters. Fortunately, most states and provinces seem to be on the backside of this flatten the curve strategy, and government restrictions are being slowly lifted in different ways in different regions. But C-suites across the globe are trying to thoughtfully plan the best way forward, and I appreciate that that's a daunting task. In addition to the severe disruption for the past 2 months, we're now staring down the barrel of a significant recession where we have already lost trillions of GDP and the US unemployment levels may soon rival that of the Great Depression. However, my team and I have been hosting dozens of executives in roundtable discussions as well as conducting one-on-one interviews to help assess this situation and to inform some opinions about how best to proceed. Equally important, for over a decade, my team and I have studied how cult brands have survived despite shifting consumer preferences, competitive threats, and economic downturns. Consider this, that for each year that we've hosted the gathering, which is an event that we created to honor the world's most successful and adored brands, we have honored at least one brand who is a centurion, meaning that they've been around for over 100 years. Surely they have learned a thing or two about recovery and how to remain relentlessly relevant despite hard times. Brands like these have taught us that there are right and wrong ways to deal with crisis. One of my professional role models is a guy named Scott Galloway. He's an industry thought leader with a particularly smart and an enjoyably provocative point of view about today's economy. He said recently that the bad thing about crisis is that they always happen. The good thing about them is that they always end. As such, we can look to past crises and find some learnings. History has proven that there are spoils to be gained by those who emerge from terrible situations well. Doing so requires bold leadership, above average creative problem solving, and uncommon courage to act. Priority number one is figuring out how to ensure the health and safety of your staff and of your customers. But once that is done, immediately shift your attention to the health of your business. In particular, there are 3 focus areas that demand your utmost attention. At a very high level, those are first, you need to figure out what, if anything, has really changed with your customer. You need to check in and have a heart-to-heart conversation to learn how they're really feeling, not just physically, but attitudinally. You need to discover if their emotions or their beliefs about your company or about your category are still the same. When you do, I suggest that you throw out your old surveys and adopt a whole new way to measure customer engagement. Secondly, you need to be really honest about what you're willing to do as an organization. Getting out of this mess is going to require decisiveness, and brands have 4 possible paths forward. I advise you to do what's necessary to dominate within one of the go-forward strategies that I'll explain a bit later. In my experience, dabbling in a few different areas usually results in mediocrity, and mediocre brands are not going to survive steep economic downturns. And finally, you need to be honest about what you're able to do. Teams matter. And pre-COVID, we saw too many C-suites paying more attention to the coaches and to their playbooks. But now it's time to focus on the players and making sure that you have the right people in the right roles who are truly up for the challenge at hand. I'm going to spend the next several minutes elaborating on each of these 3 points, and I invite you to provide some feedback in the comments so that I can respond and that we can all learn from each other. Step number 1, figure out what, if anything, has really changed. Consider that our political leaders relied upon expert epidemiologists to collect data, to build and analyze models, and then to make informed recommendations about how to slow the spread of this virus. Their expertise is helping our society avoid significantly larger deaths than what was originally predicted. And they are now giving us the confidence to methodically reopen the economy. In a similar way, in order for your business to survive, you should rely upon audience engagement experts, people who properly collect data, analyze results, and make informed recommendations about how your business should proceed. None of us is as smart as all of us, and you need the voice of the customer at your boardroom table. While you may be tempted to prioritize other reassessments, things like your supply chain or your distribution channels or your financial forecasts, one thing matters more than anything else, and that's understanding what is happening to your customer. Your customers generate revenue. Everything else is just a means to that end. So before you proceed with ideation or implementation, get accurate information. Now, these past few months have likely changed some things about what your consumers believe or how they're going to behave going forward. In addition to the loss of tens of thousands of lives and numerous negative side effects from the quarantine, this recession is going to trigger a host of events that's going to alter what, when, where, why, and how people choose to consume various goods and services. You must determine how well your category and how well your company is going to endure. We're going to feel the hangover of this situation for quite some time. Some speculate that a modest recovery might happen in the back half of this year. Other economists predict that significant problems will remain until mid-2021. And yet others say it will take years for us to dig out of the ditch that we're in. I know you probably can't read this, but as a point of reference, it took 48 to 60 months for most socioeconomic KPIs to rebound in the States after the last financial crisis in 2009. As such, the importance of audience engagement research has never been greater. You know, some business leaders have always shunned data-driven customer insights. They instead prefer to rely on their own intuition to make business decisions. But it is far less likely that your instincts are still accurate, given the magnitude of this disruption. Conversely, other companies have wholeheartedly embraced customer research, and they conduct it religiously. Unfortunately, all of our previous research studies need to be redone, given what's just happened. And as you do so, I encourage you to reevaluate your methodology. Rather than focus on questions that inform how well you are operationally executing, things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good was our service? Or rather than asking questions that gauge how satisfied your customers are in comparison to your competitors, I suggest that you begin to measure emotional attachment with your brand and with your best customers to indicate what they are thinking and feeling and doing in regards to your category today. Great brand leaders excel at delivering on customer expectations, and they realize that customers don't do what they say or say what they feel. Therefore, your research should use a distinct approach to gauge attitudes and beliefs and rely upon different kinds of indirect questions that help people, sort of reveal their feelings, similar to how a career aptitude test helps reveal what type of profession you'd be most compatible with. What people believe about your offering and about your brand is going to drive how and when they want to re-engage with you. The type of audience engagement research that I endorse enjoys the simplicity of a net promoter score, but is far more predictive and diagnostic in its value. Learning if or how much your customers' priorities and preferences have changed is job number one for any business. So now is the time to get properly educated about what the impact of this situation has been on your predominant and on your opportunity customers. Doing so will minimize waste and maximize the impact of various initiatives that can help get your business back on track. Step number 2, what are you going to do about it? Once you're armed with all this relevant customer insight, it's time to reassess your business objectives. Whenever I talk about clients and business, I kind of transform into consultant mode and I immediately start drawing 2x2s. So admittedly, these are overly simplified tools, but I find them helpful as an organizing framework. So what if we were to organize all businesses into 4 quadrants based on the probability that their category is going to return to some form of business as usual, and compare that against the ownership's commitment to fight through these hard times? Doing so would look something like this. On this vertical axis, we can assess the viability of their category based on a bunch of external factors, things like overall spending, stock price increases, shifts in market share, or consumer indexes, a whole bunch of publicly available metrics. Those will help us determine the likelihood that this category is going to have some form of return to pre-corona normals. But then on the horizontal axes, we would evaluate the organization's internal commitment and gauge their leadership's determination to thrive post-corona. Of course, publicly traded companies don't have the luxury of simply opting out because their leaders are worn out or in over their heads. But in the private sector, many owners are doing some serious soul searching. Some simply want to retire, and now seems like a really good time. Others recognize that they had some pre-existing conditions that made their business too vulnerable to expect a full recovery. So before deploying a bunch of resources into rebuild mode, all business owners should do a gut check and honestly assess who has the ability or the ambition to continue on. If we populate each of these quadrants, we come up with 4 possible business strategies. They look like this: resume, recoup, redesign, and reinvent. I'm going to briefly dive into each one in a minute, but before I do, let me quickly address one additional group, which I refer to as the reapers. Now, reapers aren't technically on this chart. They are too high and too far to the upper right. These represent highly desirable anomalies. People who have actually benefited, reaped benefits from the pandemic. The best poster child of a reaper is Zoom. Zoom's stock price has nearly tripled in the past few months, and they grew from about 10 million users in December to 200 million users in March. And then they added another 100 million users in April. So to put those numbers in perspective, both Spotify and Netflix are also darlings in their category, and each of them added 15 million users in the past 3 months. Zoom are doing those types of numbers every week. But Zoom is not the only big winner. The CEO and the maker of Lysol said this week that in May, they will produce the equivalent sales in sanitizers that they produced in the entire year last year. His business is up 13.5% last month and is still growing. And there are other obvious winners like Amazon, who just announced a $75 billion Q1 sales goal or sales achievement, and that represents a 26% increase over Q1 last year. There's also a bunch of less obvious winners, like 31 billion new apps were downloaded as consumers spent 20% more time on their phones. And according to a recent article in Vogue, our phones aren't the only things that we're playing with. Evidently, there has been an 850% spike in online searches for products tied to sexual wellness, and personal pleasure brands like Smile Makers have seen daily revenues double since we were all ordered to stay at home. My point is, not every business is in the dumpster right now. Some, such as grocery stores and some CPG brands, delivery services, and streaming content providers, they're enjoying Black Friday-like sales. They were in the right place, at the right time, with the right offering, when the world decided to turn upside down. But in the grand scheme of things, there are far more businesses suffering than succeeding. So I think our time is best spent figuring out how to make some really tough decisions for those who currently aren't reaping big rewards. So to the top left-hand quadrant of this 2x2 is the resume category. Business leaders in this category must accept their fate and realize that there is little that they can do to turn a bad year into a good one. It's not their fault that their customers stopped coming. The government forced them to shut their doors. And most businesses in this quadrant can't deliver their offerings remotely or come up with some type of meaningful workaround. For example, hair salons, chiropractors, veterinarians, home maintenance companies, live event service providers. The best that these businesses can hope for is to resume operations at some yet to be determined future date, and then they can pick up where they left off. Fortunately, most people are looking forward to consuming these services again, so they will remain a valued part of our everyday life. Unfortunately, consumers aren't going to get twice as many haircuts to make up for the ones that they missed in the spring. Same with massages or lawn service or sporting events. Once we're allowed to congregate again as a society, resume companies can really only hope to return to some semblance of business as usual. Now, lots has been written lately about the importance of continuing to advertise in order to maintain your share of voice. But weirdly enough, these articles all seem to be coming from people within the advertising industry, people who have a vested interest in your media spend. You know, share of voice and maintaining it is really a relative thing. So if your competitors have gone quiet, nothing bad will happen if you do too. Conversely, if they are now dialing up their marketing, hoping to steal your share, then you'd be wise to do the same. Personally, I'm advising my clients who are in the resume quadrant to play defense and to scale back. Their short-term survival is much more closely associated with their access to capital than to ad campaigns. Let me give you an example. Gold's Gym just filed for bankruptcy. They didn't need more marketing, they needed more money. Their fate was largely decided before Corona-19, based on the health of their balance sheet leading into this mess. One other factor affecting businesses in the resume quadrant will be how quickly can the company jolt back to life when all of these stay-at-home orders are lifted. Can they get their people working again? Can they get their operations, their factories or warehouses cranked back up again? And how well can they convince their customers that it's safe to return? Now is the time to get super prepared for when your doors are allowed to open. And that brings me to the next group in the top right-hand quadrant, a group that we call recoup. COVID-19 curtailed a lot of spending for a few months. And while no one knows how protracted or how profound this recession will be, some industries can reasonably expect to recoup some of the lost Q2 sales. So for example, people who needed a new car a few months ago still want or need a new car. they continue to go online and research what options are available. The same is true for people who needed eyeglasses or for people who needed new clothes, particularly those of us that have gained or lost weight these past few months. So some industries should expect to get not only their normal Q3 and Q4 sales, but they can get a nice bump from the suppressed sales in Q1 or Q2. In fact, most of the discretionary expenditures that I can think of, everything from new appliances to elective medical procedures, could all really come roaring back in a big way. My team and I have studied how well cult brands have fared through previous recessions. And it's interesting to note that some, such as Apple or BMW or Starbucks, they had a tough year in 2009. But then they quickly rebounded the following year, and they enjoyed growth rates going forward that actually exceeded the pre-recession levels. Others, like Walmart, Netflix, and even Lululemon, as well as a whole industry that was birthed out of the previous recession, the craft beer industry, they all had sales spikes within weeks of the recession's peak. They actually enjoyed better growth in the recession in 2009 than they did the following year. So all of these brands whom we consider masters of audience engagement and have earned a level of cult-like affinity fully recovered from the recession and emerged both bigger and better positioned than they were before. One category that we're watching very closely is home sales. So while social distancing has certainly crippled that industry in the spring, we'd argue that homeowners have never been more aware of the deficiencies of their house because we've been isolated in them for months. So I'm sure that many people have created a brand new wish list of things that they want from a new house. And given lower interest rates, it will make it very attractive to either upgrade or downsize depending on your newly assessed needs. Of course, through all of this, the caveat is that tens of millions of people are recently unemployed, and that will certainly temper their enthusiasm for big ticket prices. But assuming jobs do come back quickly, many brands could expect to have a great back half of the year or a tremendous 2021. What I advise here is that brand leaders in the recoup quadrant get really creative about how to expand their peak capacity. Some should use this time to aggressively pursue the acquisition of competitive assets, many of which are now distressed and are favorably priced. Others should explore mutually beneficial partnerships or strategic alliances. And still others should go on a hiring spree and capitalize on all of the amazing talent that has been displaced and is now seeking work. You're going to need an all-hands-on-deck approach in order to accommodate this tidal wave of demand that could be heading your way. Now, in the bottom left-hand quadrant is the resign group. Resign is a nicer word than quit because most business leaders don't want to feel like they're quitters. But choosing to hang up your cleats and to retire from the game is oftentimes a wise and even a noble decision. We celebrate that type of behavior in sports and in entertainment, and we should all honor a graceful exit from business as well. Many startups and many small business owners struggled to ever really achieve product market fit before Corona. Other firms were unable to keep up with the pace of change or new competitive pressures. And still others made a really good go of it for decades, but the owners have simply lost their spark. So for these types of businesses, this recession is going to be the proverbial nail in their company's coffin. Rather than try to summon the willpower to fight through this, simply declare your business a Corona casualty. There is no shame in that. And if you do, you will not be alone. In fact, a recent Canadian survey of 9,700 small business owners indicated that 1/3 said they are unlikely to reopen. Now, one industry that we're watching very closely in this quadrant is post-secondary education. I anticipate a fairly dramatic culling among liberal arts colleges and small universities. Academia has been preying on the hopes and dreams of the struggling middle class for years. But tuition expenses have far exceeded inflation, and the ROI of a college degree from a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 school has become very questionable. We already saw a sustained drop in applications at four-year universities in 2019, and dozens of institutions have already gone under the past 48 months. Because there remains so much uncertainty about the ability for students to even return to campuses this fall, we're anticipating a huge spike in gap year students, kids who are going to opt out of video conference room classes and instead take a year off. And that loss of income from that tuition is going to be way too great for many floundering programs to digest. And what's going to become even more difficult to overcome is if cult brand schools like Harvard or Stanford, Northwestern, and MIT, if they start offering remote learning options to more people at a lower cost, doing so will allow them to steal students from less prestigious programs, and we'll see a huge consolidation where there will be a few dozen or so institutions that are big winners and 100 or more schools that are big losers. You know, another category that we're watching very closely in this quadrant is commercial real estate. You know, the biggest pleasant surprise from this whole pandemic, aside from how much guilty pleasure Joe Exotic has brought into our lives, is that white-collar employers have learned that white-collar employees can be very productive from home. That epiphany is bad news for commercial landlords. Thanks to improving technology and new cultural norms, people can now avoid soul-sucking commutes and enjoy a greater work-life balance. We believe the traditional 9-to-5 job is an endangered species, and companies must now rethink large office space investments. You know, I do see a very bright future for co-working spaces, despite how badly Adam Newman has botched WeWork, but employees will crave occasional face-to-face coworker interaction. And some people I know will look for excuses to shower and change out of the same ragged college sweatshirt that they wear 4 days a week, even though their wife hates it. But I digress. Expect enlightened new work-from-home policies to reduce the demands on commercial buildings and to make those very unattractive assets for the landlords who own them. You know, there are a host of other businesses in this quadrant, businesses like movie theaters and retailers, restaurants and nonprofit charities, businesses that will simply cease to exist when all is said and done. Their fixed costs are too high, they have poor customer advocacy, and there's simply too much undifferentiated choice that will cull the herd, and the supply will adjust to meet the reduced demand. My suggestion for owners in this quadrant is to take their ball and go home. It was fun while it lasted, but consider that retail closures increased 60% from 2018 to 2019, and already here in Q1, retail pundits are suggesting 15,000 more stores will close this year. Things are going to get worse before they get better. So don't pour your blood, your sweat, and your tears into a dying concept. Save your energy for a new or a different endeavor with better odds of success. All right, finally, in this last quadrant is reinvent. Personally, I'm most excited about the brands that refuse to let a good crisis go to waste and instead decide to jump into the driver's seat and do something awesome. Prior to COVID-19, many companies were toying with alternative revenue streams and ways to diversify their offerings. But they were too polite in how they dealt with legacy systems or departments that were producing only modest revenue. Their temperance weakened their organization's ability to more aggressively pursue change. But every C-suite now has the excuse they need to more wholeheartedly forsake their old ways and sprint towards new ones. Let me give you a few examples. I know of a home maintenance company that is replacing costly in-person home audits with virtual assessments using the two-way camera on a homeowner's smartphone. This is just a better idea regardless of social distancing rules, because it now allows a team of inspectors to take many more video calls rather than driving around town all day with a costly fleet of vehicles. What was once a novel idea will become their core service offering, and for a fraction of the price for the end user and at a much higher margin for the brand. I also know several fast food and casual dining chains that are repurposing locations that have been underperforming for years. They're converting these locations into new grab-and-go destinations or just permanent kitchens exclusively reserved for delivery services, offering modified menus that are better suited for home dining. I know of a large retail bank that was slowly shuttering poorly utilized retail branches that is now much more motivated to pour resources into an idea that they've been incubating for years, involving a mobile-only brand and a whole suite of new digital products and services. I know of an NHL hockey club who is testing ways to energize their fan base and is now amplifying their offerings digitally to allow more fans more ways to not only interact with the brand and its players, but with each other as fans, things that they can do beyond attending a live game. And finally, I know of a tech company that has been debating internally for years the value of their hardware business versus starting a whole new business model offering productivity software and training. They have finally gotten the motivation that they need to transform their brand into an e-learning company. You know, they say that necessity is the mother of all invention, and many business leaders simply needed a little nudge to become a little bit more creative and a little bit more courageous. Admittedly, this pandemic was a lot more of an unwelcomed shove than a nudge, but it has helped to wake people up and to force their hands and to more deliberately pursue new ways to get new skills and to pursue those with greater enthusiasm as quickly as possible. I recommend that brand leaders in this quadrant use some outside help. Get some people who haven't been mired in all that cultural baggage that has historically hampered your ability to change. Also, a fresh set of eyes can always provide greater objectivity and lend valuable experience to help reduce the number of mistakes that you make as you and your people start running with scissors. Okay, the final step, step number 3. Be honest about what you're able to do. You know, gaining clarity about your customers' expectations and renewing your focus on what your business objective is going to be, those are both essential. But they are both worthless if you don't have the right people to actually execute that strategy. It is critical that you have the players required to pull off the game plan, and that you're able to effectively rally your team to do new and hard things. You know, I suggest at least 3 areas to focus on when it comes to improving your internal engagement and enhancing your ability to execute. The first is coping skills. The emotional and the psychological fallout from COVID-19 is immense. Your leaders and their teams have not dealt with this type of prolonged and elevated stress and anxiety, perhaps in their entire lives. Many of them have faced the direct impacts of this pandemic, including the loss of loved ones and friends. None of us have been adequately trained for this. In a very short amount of time, our individual, our interpersonal, and even our national psychological psyche have been shattered. Now, although it may be tempting to simply turn your attention to the business of your business, that would be inappropriate. We cannot ignore the mental and the emotional turmoil that our people are dealing with. Your leadership team's EQ at times like this must exceed their IQ. You must instruct and train your managers to guide teams differently than they did before. Many are now managing departments that have been drastically downsized. Some are facing survivor's guilt, and others are stressed about the likelihood of future workforce reductions. They're also dealing with new products and services and creating new experiences to help your business remain relevant. That leaves everyone feeling insecure and perhaps ill-equipped for what's to come. You probably need new personnel and new procedures that will ensure that you can engage regularly with your employees to discuss how this crisis is affecting them. Let them express their feelings in non-judgmental ways and help evolve your corporate communications to a style that effectively leads people through change, knowing that we're all struggling to hold it all together. Now, to do all of that effectively, consider using a leadership coach, someone to help you navigate your way through this. A good leadership coach can help restore a sense of confidence. They accelerate the development of new skills, and they improve interpersonal issues. They also become a trusted advisor for all of the chiefs that you have put in charge of executing various plans. Also, consider new training programs for all of the rank and file. Help them rebuild a sense of community. And most importantly, learn how to develop resiliency skills. It's been proven that those attributes tied to resiliency not only can boost employee well-being, they can boost company performance. Simply put, the best brands I know prioritize their relationships with employees, and you should be doing that now more than ever. The second step is capability. Due to downsizing, many organizations have now tasked people with responsibilities beyond their core competencies. Given these new stewardships, they need guidance, but their bosses are equally time-strapped and often they too lack domain expertise. So I appreciate that companies need to do more with less, but expecting excellence from well-intentioned but underqualified people is a recipe for failure. So in order to fill the skills and the capability gaps, don't just rely on full-time internal hires. That is old school thinking. Even before COVID-19, new platforms were being created to evolve employee expectations and enable advanced utilization of contingent workers. A steep recession is simply going to progress this trend into the mainstream and create permanent change for how high-performance companies attract high-performance talent to get the work done. Contingent workers provide a broad set of talents which can help you choose people with different skills or with specific industry experience or in desirable geographies that will allow your organization to benefit from the best and the brightest while avoiding the burden of full-time overhead and benefits and make it tougher for you to move nimbly and adjust to market conditions. Now, how to fully exploit the benefits of an outsourced talent network, that's a video for another day. But for now, just know that volatile markets demand variable operating models. And immediate access to valuable talent via tools like Communo can provide you with instant boots on the ground and give you the tools you need when and where you need them most, and can help complement in-house resources who lack the bandwidth or the experience to fill their essential roles. The final topic is culture. The way that leaders handle decision-making and communications in times of crisis will reverberate throughout your culture for years. The most lasting impacts will deal with the levels of trust and brand loyalty that your people feel towards you as the boss and as your company and towards your company. So, according to some recent HR surveys, only about half of the employees surveyed said that they're actually satisfied with how their employers are dealing with COVID-19 and their response actions. 63% of employees said that their employers are communicating poorly during this crisis. And that's causing them to experience significant levels of brand distrust. Because so many businesses have been dismantled by this pandemic, there is no better time to assemble your A-team and recommit to better meeting customer and employee expectations. Great cult brands are built from the inside out. Your people are where the rubber meets the road. About 30% of our cult branding engagements involve improvements to internal engagement, Because without sufficient attention paid to the players who are expected to bring your offerings to life, you can expect suboptimal results. Proper people strategies triage internal issues and make foundational improvements to both employee happiness and productivity. Now, regrettably, this pandemic has killed tens of thousands of people throughout the US and Canada. And the mitigation issues imposed to combat the virus have created thousands of company casualties. Many negative economic effects will continue for a long, long time. But the truth is this: whether we are in a boom economy or a bust economy, prioritizing proven audience engagement strategies and flawlessly executing tactics aimed at meaningful value creation for customers, prospects, or staff will help any business rise above their mediocre peers and help them remain relevant for years to come. Now is not the time to feel sorry for ourselves. Now is the time to act. I wish you the best of luck, and I offer my team's help if you think you need it. Thank you.